Wow, stories.
My wife left our son and me just last night, and this is the fourth time within the last 2 years. We've been married for 6 years. I don't really know where to begin, but I guess I'll start from the beginning of when the issue started. About 2 years ago, my wife started to change. It was very subtle, but she began to cut off people, including her own mother and siblings. She started to claim she was an independent woman and didn't need anyone, as she began hanging out with her coworker, female often, and showing up at home 5 to 6 hours after work, usually drunk. After I confronted her about not being there and causing me to do all of the housework after I got off work, she got defensive and left to stay the night at her coworker's house and showed back up 2 days later without even saying sorry. On the second occurrence, she just randomly started bringing up the past while we were talking about how life was going well and we could pay off our mortgage loan in 2 years. She started to break down out of nowhere and brought up her past and how she was raped at 13 years old by her guidance counselor, how her mother and siblings abused her, and how she had nobody. I comforted her, and she pushed me away. No matter what I said to calm things down, she twisted everything I said to make it sound like I was attacking her. She then stormed off without even wearing shoes or grabbing her phone and went to the ER at midnight. She came back 3 days later after staying at an old friend's. Afterwards, she started counseling and got on medications. She was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder and bipolar depression. On the third occurrence, it was Christmas Eve and everything was going well, or so I thought, as it had been 5 months since her last episode. Again, out of nowhere, she started bringing up her past and said some awful things. She told me that she was a horrible wife and mother and that she was broken and not good enough to be with anyone. She went off on my mother, who was present, and when my mother asked what was going on, my wife pushed her to the ground and stormed out the back door. She ended up going to the ER again and was committed to a mental health center where she spent 5 days. She came back home afterward, and things went well for quite a while until yesterday. On this latest occurrence, she came home drunk as hell. She rarely drinks, and was straight up looking for a fight with me. She baited me into getting mad at her by verbally attacking me and twisted everything I said negatively. And when she couldn't do that, she just cried while telling me she was worthless. In all honesty, she had her mindset on leaving no matter what I did. She ended up leaving again to go to the ER and was committed yet again for about a week. When I called her after 3 days, she said she was doing well and couldn't wait to come home. And things seemed to be doing better. Fast forward 2 days after she got out, and she left again and blocked my number, despite me doing nothing wrong and trying to be supportive. I'm not perfect by any means. I am too down to earth and lack ambition, I guess you could say. I'm content with just being financially stable and providing a decent life for us and our son. But my wife has always had very lofty goals. She wants to move to a different state and cut off everyone. She has her mindset on acquiring a house well beyond our means and has hinted that she would go there on her own and leave our son and me behind if need be. She says she doesn't need us and can get whatever she wants on her own. The thing is, when I met my wife, she was homeless and did anything it took to get by. She hung around a lot of unsavory types because she just didn't care and lived day to day, not caring what happened. She broke free from that life when she met me and was doing well for years until, for some reason, her past caught up to her. I blame a lot of what has happened on her getting back in contact with her old best friend, who is heavily into drugs. He used to also be her old friend with benefits. He is homeless and gets by through robbery and stealing, and has been in jail a few times. I feel like maybe I'm not street smart enough for my wife. There are many times where she tried to convince me to steal items or even hit her, and I feel like I wasn't hurtful enough for her to be happy. It doesn't make sense to me, but that's all I can come up with. I feel like my wife enjoys the struggle of losing control while high, not knowing where she will sleep, not knowing where her next meal will come from, and in all honesty, she has never cared about our son. There are times when she would just bend over naked in front of our son and ask me to have intimacy with her then and there, for instance. I have truly wanted this marriage to work, but I feel like it's just pointless even bothering anymore. The first 3 times, I was heartbroken, but this time, I just feel indifferent, honestly, to the point that I feel so disillusioned that I could literally divorce her tomorrow and get into a new relationship with somebody who is the polar opposite of my wife and not even miss a step or look back whatsoever. When my wife introduced me to her mother early on in our relationship, before we got married, obviously, her mother pulled me to the side and warned me that her daughter was a severe hypochondriac. I ignored it at the time, but as each day passed, I feel like this was the truth. There were many times when my wife was just experiencing a cold or was on her period and would whine constantly until I took her to the ER, where we got nothing but a bill. I can honestly say that my wife has been to the ER at least a dozen times in just the past 2 years, and we've accumulated a lot of debt due to this, which has led to getting loans and taking out more loans to pay off loans in an endless cycle. We went from financially secure to living paycheck to paycheck at best. I'm not trying to sound insensitive by any means. I am just calling it as I see it, and I feel like I was abused. But worse yet, that our son was abused due to having to go through all of this and witness his mother in states he should never have to witness. I guess that about covers things, though. I would like to say I'm hurt over all of this, but I'm not whatsoever. All of my empathy for her ended after what I've been through while being with her. The sad thing is that without my wife's income and the amount of debt I now have, there is no possible way that I can afford the house. So I'm either moving back in with my parents or going to be homeless at 34 years old. Yeah. If anything, I'm just angry because I did everything right. And it didn't matter because I never had a say in anything, despite paying most of the bills, preparing 99% of meals, cleaning the house 99% of the time, taking our son to school 99% of the time, and pulling 99% of the weight in the relationship overall. All my wife ever did for me was provide intimacy often and spontaneously. And when it comes to our son, she gave birth to him? At least when my time comes, decades from now, I can die knowing I tried my best and I was a damn good father, better than even my own father, who was excellent, and raised my brother and me the best he could manage. I honestly pity my wife because she is incapable of knowing love and just fakes it to make it when it comes to everything. I get that her past was rough, but I feel as though she blew everything out of proportion. And from her stories she told me through the years, she always had a thing for older guys and was self-intimacy multiple times a day from a young age and called me daddy during intimacy. So I honestly just don't know what to believe anymore when it comes to her. I know that she isn't genuine when it comes to a lot of things and fabricates issues. And she has a kink for abuse and enjoys suffering, none of which I understood as it was irrational to me. But I played along just to placate her. Sorry, I guess I am rambling at this point. But I had to get all of that off of my chest before the shell shock wears off. Thank you all for your time, and I appreciate any replies that bear fruit, because this basket is empty right now, and I can't tell apples from oranges because I don't have any. To add, I've decided that a divorce is the way to go. Thank you all. Despite all the years, I feel surprisingly numb, and this decision hurt less than some short-term relationships I've had that ended badly. I guess I just stopped caring after a certain point. I put so much effort into the marriage that I'm just spent, in all honesty. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. You had no business dating a 16-year-old as a full-grown man, first of all. Second of all, get a divorce. Get a lawyer to help with custody. Get proof of her hospitalizations and require sobriety and proof of good mental health before you let her back around your child without supervision. Comment 2. So you, as a 28-year-old, met a homeless 19-year-old and decided to save her, and now you're surprised it's not working out. Maybe grow a spine and stop dating homeless teenagers and expecting a housewife. Now for the update. Hey everyone, a lot has happened since my last post. 2 weeks ago, after my wife left for the 4th time, I decided to file for divorce. I thought it would be a straightforward process, but I was wrong. The first mistake I made was underestimating how complicated it would be to serve her the divorce papers. She had blocked my number and disappeared, making it impossible for me to contact her directly. I had to hire a private investigator to track her down, which took longer than expected and cost more money than I had anticipated. During this time, I had to juggle work, taking care of our son, and dealing with the emotional fallout. My son started acting out at school, getting into fights and refusing to do his homework. I was called into the principal's office multiple times, and it became clear that he was struggling to cope with his mother's absence. I tried to be there for him as much as possible, but it was hard when I was barely holding it together myself. One night, while going through some old paperwork, I found a letter from my wife that I had forgotten about. It was dated a few months before her first episode. In the letter, she talked about feeling trapped and suffocated in our marriage. She mentioned her desire to reconnect with her old friend, the one who was heavily into drugs. She wrote that she missed the excitement and unpredictability of her old life. Reading that letter was like a punch to the gut. It made me realize that her leaving wasn't just about her mental health issues. It was also about her longing for a life that I couldn't provide. I decided to confront her about the letter when I finally managed to get her on the phone. She was staying with her old friend, just as I had suspected. When I brought up the letter, she didn't deny any of it. Instead, she accused me of being controlling and not understanding her needs. She said that she felt like she was living in a prison and that she needed to break free. Her words hurt, but they also gave me some clarity. It was clear that our marriage was beyond saving. The next day, I received a call from Child Protective Services. Someone had reported that our son was living in an unsafe environment. I was shocked and confused until I realized that it must have been my wife who made the report. She was trying to get back at me for filing for divorce. The CPS worker came to our house and conducted an investigation. They interviewed me, my son, and even our neighbors. It was a stressful and humiliating experience, but in the end, they found no evidence of neglect or abuse. Still, the whole ordeal left me feeling even more drained and defeated. In the midst of all this, I had to deal with the financial fallout. Without my wife's income, I was struggling to make ends meet. I had to take on extra shifts at work, which meant less time with my son. I also had to dip into our savings to pay for the private investigator and the legal fees for the divorce. It felt like I was drowning in debt, and there was no end in sight. One night, while I was working late, I got a call from my brother. He had heard about what was going on and offered to help. He said that he and his wife had a spare room and that my son and I could stay with them until we got back on our feet. It was a generous offer, and I was grateful, but I was also hesitant. Moving in with my brother felt like admitting defeat, but I knew that I couldn't keep going the way I was. So I swallowed my pride and accepted his offer. Moving in with my brother was a big adjustment. My son had to switch schools, and I had to get used to living in someone else's house. But it was also a relief to have some support. My brother and his wife were great with my son, and having them around made things a little easier. I also started seeing a therapist to help me deal with everything that was going on. It was something I'd been putting off for a long time, but I knew that I needed to take care of my mental health if I was going to be there for my son. During one of my therapy sessions, I had a breakthrough. I realized that a lot of my wife's behavior was driven by her unresolved trauma. She had never really dealt with the abuse she suffered as a child, and it had affected every aspect of her life. I also realized that I had been trying to fix her, thinking that if I just loved her enough, she would get better. But that was never my job. She needed professional help, and I couldn't provide that for her. As I started to come to terms with everything, I also began to reflect on my own past. I grew up in a stable and loving home, but I had always felt like I was living in my father's shadow. He was a successful businessman, and I had always felt pressure to live up to his expectations. I realized that a lot of my desire to make my marriage work was tied to my fear of failure. I didn't want to admit that I couldn't fix my wife or save our marriage because it felt like admitting that I wasn't good enough. But as I started to let go of that fear, I also started to see a way forward. I began to focus on what I could control, like being there for my son and taking care of myself. I also started to think about what I wanted for my future. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to dream about a life beyond the chaos of my marriage. I know that the road ahead won't be easy. There will be more challenges and setbacks, but I feel more prepared to face them now. I have a support system in place, and I'm taking steps to rebuild my life. And most importantly, I'm learning to let go of the things I can't control and focus on what I can.